Hey everyone! Today we are continuing the process of 3D modeling car and vehicle interiors. This is part of a series where I'll be covering interior car modeling from beginning to end. Today's video focuses on applying our modeling workflows to the steering wheel. This tutorial series is targeted for a beginner to advanced skill level in 3D modeling. Maya 2022.3 will be used for this tutorial, but the workflows can be applied to any 3D software as well as any version of Maya. So with that, let's get right into it. Alright, so here we are in Maya, and you can see the progress that we've made so far from our last couple of videos. We already have the block out, and in the most recent video, I've detailed out the rear hatch. Now I'm going to turn our attention to the front of the vehicle, and I will be working on the steering wheel. Now for the steering wheel, I'll just be applying basic modeling workflows to create what we have here. And during the blockout phase, I've already created kind of a simple representation of the steering wheel. And this is going to be very helpful for modeling what we have in front of us. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take this block out and I'm going to throw it right at the origin here. So if I turn on my grid, I'm going to throw it back at the origin. So if I throw this at the origin, and I'm going to hide the vehicle that we have, and we can begin the modeling process. Now, when beginning the modeling process, one of the key things that you always want, that I always bring up, is getting your reference, right? So you can see this large reference mood board that I have that I've been continuously expanding, and you'll notice as we start getting to specific components, I will do a bit of research in finding more reference for that specific component. I have some nice shots of the steering wheel here that I'm replicating for this specific vehicle mod. Now for this specific vehicle mod, you can see that it has this really nice wood plus metal combination plus kind of this leather or pleather horn pad here. And if you go online and do a bit of searching, you'll be able to find all sorts of reference. And I can't understate how beneficial it is, especially when going online, is that eBay and just general auto parts or secondhand, you're going to find a lot of people, selling and putting their own reference shots online. So this is really, really helpful. So, things like eBay, things like Facebook, don't pass up opportunities for good reference from unlikely places like eBay and Facebook. So it's been really, really helpful when building up this mood board reference. So now that we know that, and we have our reference, and we have all sorts of angles, we can begin the modeling process. And since I've already created this blockout during the blockout phase, what I'm going to do is take this blockout and set it back to kind of a 0 position, and it's going to make things modeling a lot easier, especially when you have a clean line of symmetry and you have, radial symmetry, and you're not worrying about rotational pivots and whatnot. So I will hide our grid here and I'll create a new torus. So if I shift right click, I want to create a torus, and I know that this cylinder or this steering wheel was 18 centimeters from when we did our block out. So if I set this to 18, you can see that the outer radius is just about the correct size. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this reference here is that when you model steering wheels, and this is what the back of it looks like, it always has these bumps along the main part of the steering wheel, and then it kind of smooths out on the sides here. I'm sure most people here or watching this video has driven before, or at least held a steering wheel, so you always know these ridges that are there to help with grip. Now, you could be very specific and count out all of these ridges, which is about 16 ridges per segment. So if there's 16 here and then times 3, we're going to at least need, about 48 edges just for these pieces. And then you'd need to basically double and triple that to get all of those details in here. Now, because this is not really going to be seen, I will just add this detail, but I won't add the exact amount. So if you're following along, you can apply this and apply the exact amount if you wish. But for what I'm doing, I'm going to just give it these ridges on the back and then move along. So with that being said, I will kind of bring this torus up and increase the section radius to 1. and increase the subdivision axes to about 64, and then lower the height subdivision to 16. So we get something like this. So this is definitely quite a bit to start with, but it's going to give us that extra detail. So you can go higher or lower based off of this. And again, we need that for the reference here, or to create what we see based off the reference. Now that we have that, I'm going to hide our block out and really just focus on this part of the steering wheel. So I want to turn on symmetry. So I have world Z symmetry. So now it's going to help with the selection. And I'm just going to begin the process of moving things out and creating these divots here on the back of the steering wheel. So symmetry is going to help. And what I will do is just kind of select the whole part here. And we can find our line of symmetry is right here. So I'm going to select right after that. So I'm going to select every other one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick and speed it up. Okay, so here we are. I've selected every other. I also know there's some scripts that'll allow you to select every other edge. So I'll probably pull that into my Maya, but I don't have that set up right now. So now I can go to the front view and I want to control marquee select about the halfway point here for those edges. Okay, now what I can do is if I hold W, if I press W for move tool and hold control, middle mouse drag, you can see I can move on the normal. Now, this is nice, but I don't like the fact that, it's not giving us good transitions from moving this out to the normal to this unselected edge. So instead, I'm going to go to our modeling toolkit and we're going to use soft selection. Now, if you use soft selection by default, you're going to notice that it's probably set to surface or global or something like that. So what you can do is just use something like volume, which is really nice. So it'll just work on a selection mode. And if you press B, or not press B, but B enables the tool as well. But if you hold B and middle mouse drag, you can change the radius size of the soft selection. And now that I've done that, I want to make sure that these edges here are not being impacted at all. So you'll see, there we go. I can start to move this and it's going to, move it out on the normal and give us a nice softer transition. Okay, now we know that our line of symmetry is right about here, and we also know that part of the steering wheel, according to our reference, if I pull this up, doesn't have this, these divots here. So I want to make sure to not move those out on the divots, and I will bring back real quick like our reference or our block out so we can have a good idea of where that is, right? So this is, again, a really good reason why having blockouts is helpful. So I can go into X-ray mode here and we can see this a little bit better. And we can see I can deselect these faces there. And then I can deselect the middle one there. So there we go. So we have our correct selection. Now we have soft select. And if I press W, Control, middle mouse button, I can just slightly start to move these out on the normal, and there we go. So that gives us something a lot nicer, and if it's a little bit too much, you can bring it back down. And what you can do is bring these out, but also bring the other selections in. So now I want to select the alternate set of edges, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, there we are. I selected every other, and I'm just going to do the opposite. So I'm going to control marquee select, so deselect the edges that I don't want. Then I can enable soft select again and just move these a little bit on the reverse normal. So if you hold control middle mouse, I'm just going the opposite direction. So this gives us this nice detail. And if I hit smooth preview, you can see we have these nice ridges here. Now I can push these further, maybe by beveling or adding some further details. But for now, this is going to work plenty fine. You'll notice that some steering wheels are, a lot sharper or a lot smoother on the back just for these grips. So this will work for what we're trying to do. Now that I have that detail, I can now add in this nice simple extrusion here for where the steering wheel, the metal attaches. So I will turn off soft select or press B to disable it. And if we head over to the bottom, I'm going to do this right on our line of symmetry. So what I want to do is grab about these 6 faces here, because I want this nice extrusion kind of coming off of the flat side, close to the flat side of the steering wheel. So I will grab my move tool with W, hold shift, and just kind of extrude that outward. Then I can simply scale in the Z-axis here, or the X-axis. So we have that. Then what I can also do is scale these vertices so it becomes nice and flat, so we don't have this curvature from the cylinder. So we get this nice square box shape. And then you'll notice that it's nice and tapered. It kind of tapers up with this curvature. So I'm going to just move these in. Remember, we're doing this on the line of symmetry to leverage the modeling efficiencies. And what I then want to do is kind of move these edges towards the bottom outwards, like so. So we get something like this if we look at this in smooth preview. Now what I want to do, it would be a good time to apply a new shader, a new material. So I will apply this Fong material that I've darkened a bit, make it better for viewing when recording. So there we go. So we have this just nice simple extrusion, and then it also kind of comes inward. So if I bring over our reference, you'll see that it kind of comes up and angles back towards the back of the steering wheel. Okay, so I just want to add that and move the direction of these faces. So I'm going to actually scale these down. So if I grab my scale tool, I'm going to scale these down and then kind of move. So if this is the, again, I don't want to lose kind of the direction that we're at. You see how it's kind of coming out planar, and it's going to be going at an angle. Again, this is why the blockout is helpful and reference is helpful. So I want to move these down a bit like so. If you notice that your edges are becoming a little bit too close, you can always just kind of space them out a little bit, and you can just use edge slide. I would be careful here. I mean, it should be fine just to move these just a little bit and don't go too far when doing that, because that's going to be, you know, we don't want to mess up the curvature is what I'm trying to say. So we have that, and we also have this edge here that's going to help. We can move that kind of inward. That's going to help give us this nice little highlight that we have on the steering wheel. Like, I'll go to the ones with the better lighting to look at that. So you always notice this nice continuous highlight. A little bit of a divot there. You'll see it. You know, it depends, I guess, on how polished and clean it is. So there we go. This should give us some nice detail. And if I look at it now, you can see that we're starting to bring in some of that detail. And of course, I need to add in some of these holding lines. So I will add the ones here at the front or at the top. And I can grab these edges, grab my scale tool, hold Control Shift, and kind of scale them inward. Well, maybe I'll do that without the symmetry, because sometimes on the line of symmetry, scaling gets a little bit weird. And I'm doing that. It's a little bit weird here, but you can see what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to straighten these edges out like so. I can turn on my symmetry again, and I can have this edge here that's going to help with this curvature. So you can start to see we have these two edges that are going to help with the control the curvature here of this steering wheel. So if I wanted it tighter, I can bring this edge down. If I wanted it to be a little bit larger of a radius, then, you know, I can bring this set of vertices outward. So that gives us that control if I move that. And then I would re-add this here to continue that taper. So we get something like this. Okay, so this looks good. This gives us the detail that, I'm looking for. And if I wanted to move this out just a hair, again, I don't want to disrupt the curvature here, but move that in. You can see what that's doing, giving us a little bit more control of a highlight there on this steering wheel. Now that we've done this part, okay, you can start to see it's starting to angle back. That's looking good. We can now apply that to the other parts of the steering wheel. So instead of doing that all over again, this is one of the annoying things about, not having radial symmetry instead of just symmetry over one axis. So it's not too bad because all I need to do is really duplicate with Control D and rotate this till it gets about the right position. And for this position here, I ended up using 112.5. That's what I ended up using for the final model because it attaches, I can attach it here to the original mesh. So if I actually isolate these two, so this is the one that I just rotated and duplicated, and you can see that 112.5 is a perfect rotation, except for the parts where I extracted, right, and deleted those faces. So I will do that again, but this time I will go negative. So I hit Control D to duplicate again. So I have a third model. So I have a negative 112, and there we go. So now I've rotated it where it gives us this nice radial symmetry here on the model. And if we kind of look at where we're at, get back to our line of symmetry, this is where we're at with the model. So, it's pretty close to what we have here. I can maybe adjust this, but this is going to work well. And you, of course, can change these values to match any steering wheel that you're modeling. Okay, so what I will do now is for the toruses that I duplicated, I will delete all but the faces that I need, which are going to be these, or this section here. So I can, oops, I meant delete everything except that. So I can delete those faces. And to invert selection, just hold Shift or Control Shift, and I can go to this torus here, select the faces that I do want, which are these, and then invert selection with Shift. Just click, holding Shift and marquee select, and then deleting those, and there we are. Now I can go back and select from on the original torus here, I can delete the faces that I want to attach, and there you go. So it does save a bit of time, and we can also leverage our now line of symmetry. So I can grab all three of these now and combine and delete history, Control 1 to isolate, and hit 3. And you can notice, or it may be hard to notice, but there's a seam here because we need to merge the vertices. So if I go to vertex, select all of these vertices, shift right click, merge vertices, and I like to use 0.003, it's just a nice low threshold, and make sure nothing else gets merged. We are good to go. So now we have this base part of the steering wheel. And, you can, of course, have control over this if you feel like this area's, too sharp or too, soft. You can bring these edges closer together or separate them. So that'll work fine. So we'll leave it as is and keep moving along because now we want to add the kind of the metal portion. So what I want to do for this is, you can see that it really starts to go back here, and there's this really, steep angle here for this metal piece. So it kind of comes out straight, angles and curves out straight, and there's a subtle curvature here as well, or a little bit of a bend here. So you'll see this in all different angles and whatnot. So we're going to try to achieve that here. It's a relatively simple piece, but there is some complexity to it, and we can leverage basic modeling tools in order to create that. Okay, so what I want to do first actually is get this base centerpiece. So I will create a new cylinder, and I'll create it with good old 16 size, should be fine, not 165, 16, and bump out this radius a bit and increase the height, because I want to make sure I at least attach it to the correct part of the steering wheel. So I move that down, and I ended up using a radius of about 4, maybe 4.25, something like that, 4.5, something along those lines. And this should work fine. So I use 4.5, and we can keep the height to about here. And now that I have that, I'm going to attach, I know that I'm going to attach to this, because this is really a really simple piece. We'll do that probably within the last minute or so. I can attach now the metal pieces. So I'm going to, again, work on my line of symmetry. So we're going to work on our Z line of symmetry. Here we go. And I will hide, I'll go hide, and I will just hide the block out since now we're in a good spot. Create a cube, and I will just put this kind of in position here. So this is where it's going to attach, and I can just kind of scale until I get pretty close to this. Now, I'm not going to worry about tapering, because you'll notice it also starts small here where it attaches on the wood, and then gets a lot wider here where it attaches on the metal, because it needs more of a support frame for where it attaches for the steering column. So it also just barely comes past this. And one huge tip I would say is that just keep your objects separate. Okay, keep your objects separate, keep them modular. I see people and students, when they're learning 3D modeling, they want to model all this as one continuous object. And I'll tell you, it just overcomplicates things when it doesn't need to be. A good rule of thumb is model things the way that they're made in 3D or in real life. So 3D model the way things are made in real life. It'll just make your life for materials, UVs, and baking and rendering so much more easier. And it's going to just give you a more realistic result. All right. So I'm going to just move this and scale this just barely out. And I'm going to get that initial extrusion. So we have that kind of initial extrusion where it attaches and it's straight. So I will now extrude this straight. And what I will then do is just bring this pretty far down here. Okay, now if we bring back our block out, you can see kind of how far we went. So I'm just going to attach it something like this, and this should be fine. So I'm going to also not worry. You can see that there's like a little bit of some sort of molding there. It's attached. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to have it just intersect, because that's a detail that just doesn't need to be there. I can, of course, attach it to this piece. It's not that difficult, but it's just not needed, right? Especially when you're modeling for on the job and you're modeling to get things done in a fast, efficient way. Some of those details aren't needed, like behind the steering wheel. Those details aren't needed, and we'll probably see this in mostly full frame shots, right? There may be the closest shot here of the steering wheel in frame of the with the regular rest of the IP. So now that we have that, I can actually bring this face back a little bit, and you can see that it's also just extrudes in there, and it's a bit thicker. So I'm going to just move these vertices here, something along the lines of this. Okay. Now, again, there's a bit of a taper there, but I'm going to add that taper later. And you can see that there's 3 extrusions here, right? 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to add that. So I'm going to add an edge here and about here, and then I can add those details. So knowing that, right, we're just making sure that we plan accordingly. I will go down the steering wheel, something like this. And we can have that part. Looks like about the right distance, right? We're just using an eye for measure right now. And if I move up here, probably something along the lines here. Now, these 3 faces or these 3 cutouts are going to come in about here, okay, on these faces here. All right, so now that I have that, I can just now go into edge mode here, go to my modeling toolkit, and this is where connect is nice. So if you go to connect with this edge ring selected like this, middle mouse drag, you can start to increase the amount of segments here. So I know that I need 3 faces. So that gives me these 3 segments here. And from these 3 segments, I'm going to bevel these a bit. So it gives me a little bit of space in between. So I can reduce the fraction here. So something like this, because I don't want to extrude all of these. You'll see why I did this extra bevel, just to help kind of support these faces. Okay, now that I have that, I can select these 3 faces on the front and the back. And actually, before I do that, I want to add one more edge right on the edge here. Because again, you'll notice that it doesn't go right up into the edge. So we want to have some support loops and support faces there. So we can do something along the lines of this. And of course, our line of symmetry here is being a little bit annoying. So yeah, it's having a hard time with that. It's sometimes just a my thing. So what I'll do is maybe just delete these 2 faces here, since, well, I don't want to delete these yet. I'll turn off the line of symmetry and multi-cut in the middle. So now I have an edge here. And then I can go back to World Z and it should be fine. Yep, there we go. So that fixed it. Just make sure you have an edge for your line of symmetry. Okay, so now that we have that, like I said, I can grab these faces here. And probably these ones right here. And this should give me what I want. If you wanted to change the size as they go up, you can, but they're pretty uniform. They just get wider as they go because the whole bar is tapered. And I'll select the faces on the front and the back and extrude, but only use offset with no thickness. So we get something along the lines of this. So it's pretty close to what we have, you know. I don't have perfect measurements or blueprints, so this looks close enough. Maybe a little bit thinner, 0.25, and great. So I can hit Q to exit the tool, delete these faces, and then now I can select these edges and just bridge. So if I just go down to bridge, there you go. It bridged these faces. And I can select these edges again, bridge. This will work well for what I'm trying to do. And bring these in. Now, if you do feel like this is probably a little bit too thick, right? So you can see how I did it here. I probably should have made this a little bit thinner. So I'm going to delete these faces and just, you know, kind of go planar here. So if I delete these faces and just essentially just kind of not undo, but delete these faces like so, I can kind of redo this. So I didn't plan for this, but at least show you how to sometimes fix things if they didn't go as planned. But I can now just take this one-sided face and I can just extrude this just like so. And there you go. So it works all the same. Obviously it's black and it's a lot thinner because now it matches this. So since we had good geometry, this will work well for what we're trying to do. Oops, minus 0.2, maybe 0.15. It's pretty thin piece. Like if I zoom out a bit, yeah, that should be fine. And then of course, if I hold spacebar, go to mesh display, you can do reverse. So that'll reverse the normals, and there you go. All right, and you can also just do that up here, but I like to use the, you know, marquee or the floating UI anywhere I can. Okay, so now that I have that, you can see that's looking good. I can add in some holding lines for these edges, and I don't want this. I don't want to bevel. I want to bevel with a chamfer. So there you go. We get something like this. We don't want it to be too tight. We get a nice highlight. And this will work if we want it, we don't want it to be circular. So this is where adding these kind of middle edges is going to help keep it rectangular. And so that's looking good. And what we can do now is start to use some modifiers, okay? So I'm going to delete history. And typically before I do that, I always duplicate the mesh and I'll just, throw it on my whip folder so I have that as a backup so I don't mess anything up. And also save while I'm at it. So I will also add in kind of some extra holding lines here and extra lines here for holding lines for these corners, because if I smooth preview, you see it becomes too soft. And if we're looking at our reference here, it's a softer corner, but it's not super sharp. So I do want to add just these holding lines, which will be nice because this will allow us and give us a lot of control over how tight this radius is. All right, so that should be fine. Maybe I can move these back. That's a nice thing of just modeling from you can always make adjustments as you go. And I will add one tight holding line here for the edges at the very end. I can maybe delete those later, but for now, this is fine. Now this part actually is pretty soft, so I will probably remove that edge and move this up, and there we go. So we get this nice soft attachment back here. So now that I've got that, I can, again, maybe, duplicate, throw it in my whip folder, and begin the process of going through and using some modifiers, or deformers. So with these deformers, it's going to save us some work. So instead of going through and manually adding the taper and adding this bend, I will just do that with some deformers. So if I go to my deform menu at the top here, I can go to non-linear. And the first one that I want to add is a bend. And you can see we have that. It's just kind of this line. If you've never used it before, you can just kind of add a little bit of a curvature so you can see what's going on. And because this was like not a perfect object that we created, we have to adjust the pivot here. So this is bending along this axis. So this line here is what you want to be the direction of your model, right? So this line should be perpendicular since I want it to bend the other way. So we get it like this. And if I rotate it, there you go. So you can see it's going to bend it this way. So this should give me, it's pretty close there. We want it to kind of match the overall angle, and it does. And from here, I can increase the curvature, and you can see it just starts to bend the model. All right, it's starting to look good. And, this is just depends how far you want to push it. I would say, I would keep it, around maybe, probably no more than 90 because we want a nice subtle bend there. And this should work fine. If you notice some artifacts, what ends up happening, and this is just kind of a sub D thing, is it helps to add, I should probably do that again, but delete history. It helps to add in some extra geometry when you're using bend. So if you notice some artifacts, just add in some extra edges there. And of course, I don't know why it messed up here, but I'll have to finish or clean that up. I didn't undo quite far enough, so that's why. So use error, and there we go. I'm just gonna add in like an extra edge. And so that should help with this, if you're having some artifacts and pinching and stuff like that. So again, I will just quickly throw the deformer back on. Okay, so here we're kind of back to where I was before. I had this nice bend, and I did it with a few more edges, so it shouldn't artifact nearly as much. And if I throw on that nice shiny Fong, you can see that it's looking good. There's not a lot of pinching around the corners, so it looks nice and solid. So that's all looking great, and I can probably throw one edge here for good measure just to help with that and keep those ends nice and sharp. Now we can add the taper. Maya calls it flare, so I could go to deform, and again, non-linear, flare, and I can rotate this till this line is parallel. So instead of being perpendicular, it's parallel this time, unlike the bend. So it's pretty close here. And I can now go to the start flare Z, and I can, increase that maybe a little bit if the bend kind of lost some volume there. And I can go to end flare and start to taper that up. So you can start to see what we get. I'll actually set this back. So we have this. So now we get this nice shape here where we go small to large, and we have the small to large or larger, and that looks great. And so, what I can do, maybe I'll lower that just a little bit so it's not as big. But what I can do now is like duplicate this, and I'll keep this cube with all these modifiers. I'll group these and throw them in my whip folder so I have them if I want to come back. And if you want to make any final adjustments, that's where the lattice is great. So you can make the lattice adjustments. Also, what I will do, if you're getting annoyed by the pivot being here, I can center the pivot and I can press insert and kind of more closely match the angle here. So I probably should have did that at first, but either way, this will work. And delete history, deform, lattice. Oh, it didn't seem to take there. So maybe I will. Oh, I see that it rotated. Well, what you could do, another thing that I've done before is I'll like rotate it where it's flat. So maybe 40 degrees or maybe a little bit. So I'll copy this value, whatever it is, freeze transforms, delete history, okay? And then I will re-rotate it back. It should be a negative value now. So you get that. And then I should be able to have that lattice match that, okay? So just a couple of hacks, not really hacks, but just workarounds in order to get that to work. And you can make final adjustments with the lattice if you want, where you're like, oh, I wanted to change the position of this, but I don't want to mess with the vertices. So really, really nice. If you haven't used modifiers, they're great for your workflow. I can move this a little bit closer. So you get something like that. Okay, so I'll delete history if I'm happy with this. And what I will do is kind of bring these in just a little bit more. These edges here, what I'm going to do is scale these in just a bit. And I'll go to my modeling toolkit here and change this back to world. And scale that in. That means I have to change it on the other one, so I can do that later after the video, but make that a little bit thinner, and then I can add those holding lines back. Okay, so we have this, and we can wrap it up with this nice simple piece here in the middle, which is just a series of extrusions. So it's just extruding out and kind of beveling, so a combination of bevels. So begin by selecting the cylinder, and we can just grab these faces. So I can just kind of tab select, marquee select, and what I can do is, you can use Control E to offset in. So we get something, maybe like 0.5, 0.75, gives us a little bit of that thicker part here. And then I can extrude up now. So now I want to add this piece. So extrude up. And that's a nice thick piece. I'll probably again do 0.75. And then we'll extrude again to kind of create this inner circle here. So I hit G to repeat last. And I'm liking the 0.75. It's working well for this thickness. And then I can now press G again to extrude down. And we get that. But this time you can see that it kind of comes in scaled. So I can offset that like so. And I will use, minus 0.75. 0.75 seems to be working pretty well for most of these. Maybe that offset's not as much. But yeah, this maybe 0.6-ish. Okay, now that I've done that, we can add some bevels here for these details. So, this part of the steering wheel I can select, and I can add kind of this initial bevel. And maybe that's a little bit too large. So you can see I've beveled that, and then I can select these new beveled edges and bevel these. Okay, and I like maybe to keep it not nearly as tight, but I'll use something like 0.25, 0.3, something along those lines. And this part here, it looks like it kind of comes down just a little bit. Oops, I should probably select the whole edge loop and move these down just slightly and then give it a bevel. That's a bit tighter, so 0.25 seems to be working pretty good, but I will give it a segment, 2 segments. So we have something like that coming in at an angle. And then for the rest of these, I will just select these all. And for these, I'm going to do it with chamfer on and use like 0.3 offset. And that should work great. And I'll just, grab this edge here, multi-cut, and I'm just going to add in this loop here at the bottom. And I can offset these because I just need to kind of get in this last extrusion there. So I'll a little bit of an offset. If I go back to my reference, you'll kind of see that in some other shots, like on the back of the wheel and kind of where it attaches to the steering column. So we just need to get pretty close there. It doesn't need to be, yeah, this is plenty fine. And then I hit G to repeat last and just move that out. All right, and move this down. And I can add in some manual holding lines and some offsetting face. So this bottom face, I'll probably end up deleting this, but I'll just have this as a holding offset face, and then just kind of manually add in these last few edges here for these holding lines. And I'm just control middle mouse clicking a few times. Now this part is probably a little bit too thick, so I'll bring that back because I want to match this thickness here. So bring that up maybe just a bit, and I can bring this whole shape up like so, because it's a little bit further back, but this gives us what we want. And what I can do now for this piece is I can control D to duplicate it. And you can duplicate as instance if you want, if you're making any updates later. But for now, it should be fine. I can always, rework that. And for this duplicate, I'm going to go to insert mode to move my pivot like this, and press V to snap it, vertex snap it to the center. And then because this is a duplicate model, I can just freeze transforms. I can hold Control D to duplicate, and or not D, not yet. But if you remember, it was at 112, so 112.5. And if I hit D again, I can just go the opposite direction, 112.5, and there you go. So now we've created the steering wheel. We have all those details in. I can hit 3 to smooth preview, and it looks, pretty close to what we have here in our reference. So you can see this is what we have. And if you need to make any adjustments, you certainly can. The nice thing is everything is modular. If you wanted to increase the size, if you want to make these bars a little bit thicker, make this a little bit larger, this a little bit smaller, so on and so forth, everything is done correctly or modular in a modular fashion, so we can update it. So I can finally put this back into position. So the way that I will do that is I will create a locator, and this will be the steering wheel piece, maybe more in the center. And I can call it, steering wheel. I can throw all of these guys inside this group, steering wheel. If I bring back, the interior, and if I bring back that kind of original block out that I had, which is going to be this guy, so I can duplicate in position. I can grab the steering wheel. You can see that if I freeze transforms before it goes, so everything's kind of zeroed out, I can bring this and put this inside of this steering wheel, or not this steering wheel. Let me see. Yeah, this steering. Yeah, I did it right. So I dragged it there. So I missed it, so I can go there. So you see how it has all these transforms? Well, now I can set these transforms back to 0. Boom, it pops it right into place. And then I can kind of, move it into position. So it gets pretty close, and you can make any final adjustments there. And then I can Shift P to unparent it. I'm only using it to quickly get it back into position. All right, so that's good. And that's how I did that. And, you know, I can, of course, just move these guys. So you can see, because I have all the transforms, I can just move in object. So if you have this set to world, it won't work because, you know, it'll just move it based on 4 coordinates. So make sure you have objects and you didn't freeze transforms, and you're good to go. So you can move that back. But that is the workflow that I use to create the steering wheel. So, you know, the modeling workflows, the modeling techniques and skills and tools are not earth-shattering or groundbreaking. They're really straightforward, but I hope you picked up on the overall workflows and kind of, you know, apply that to anything that you're modeling. All right. So if you stuck around the whole time, thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions or what you'd like me to model next. But I will be moving on to, you know, doing the IP, the seat, and the door panel in the next few videos. So until then, I'll see everyone around. Take care.